Welcome back to Next Gen Console Watch, our show following everything happening with the latest gaming hardware. I'm Daemon Hatfield, and this week I'm joined by Ryan McCaffrey, host of IGN's Xbox podcast, Podcast Unlocked.
Good to see you, Daemon.
You as well. And Max Scoville, host of IGN's PlayStation podcast, Podcast Beyond.
Hello, hello.
And this week, let's talk about Halo. The developer, now formerly known as 343 Industries, made a number of recent announcements, including that it will officially be changing its name to Halo Studios, and that it's working on multiple new games. In addition, the newly rebranded studio says that all future projects will be developed on Unreal Engine, leaving behind the Slipspace engine utilized by Halo Infinite. It's a huge shift for the Halo series, not least because of the resources poured into the Slipspace engine over the years. 343 notoriously struggled with it during Halo Infinite's development, in part because it used tools dating back to the early 2000s. Now, switching to Unreal Engine 5 would make it much easier to bring future Halo games to PlayStation 5. So, Ryan, what say you? Halo 7, whatever it's called, does it come to PS5 or maybe even PS6?
Yeah, I think let's start at that last point. I think you're absolutely right that if indeed we were to see a Halo game built on Unreal Engine that would come to PlayStation, it's probably not going to be PS5. I mean, maybe it'll be like a cross-gen thing, like since cross-gen seems to be a permanent fixture of our gaming lives now, practically. But yeah, the fact is that this Unreal Engine switch is still pretty new. Per the ViDoc that Halo Studios released, they're still staffing up. It sounds like they're still in the pretty early days of whatever they're working on. So given that we're already 4 years in, which is going to be at least halfway through this generation, maybe more already, I don't think it's gonna land on PS5. I think we're looking at PlayStation 6 and the next Xbox, whatever that ends up being called. But to circle back to the earlier part of your question, I think it's more likely than not that Halo does indeed come to PlayStation with the next one. I mean, the writing's been on the wall. Microsoft has said that their initial trial run of the 4 games that they brought from the back catalog over to PlayStation has been successful. We're seeing Indiana Jones get just a mere 6-month exclusive on Xbox. And Halo, I mean, if we look at the last 10 years, the unfortunate fact for Microsoft is that they are not convincing the PlayStation owners that went to PS4 after they were 360 players. They're not getting those people back. They have not been able to successfully woo those people back to their platform. And so, if you're Microsoft and you are now one of, if not the largest software games publisher in the world after buying not just Activision Blizzard for $69 billion, but Bethesda a few years before that for $7.5 billion, plus the tens or hundreds of millions when we add up the other studios that they've been buying over the last about the last 6 years, 6-7 years. So they've got so many games to publish, and they've already been putting their games on as many platforms as they can that aren't PlayStation, just in terms of, they've really doubled down on PC. They're in the cloud now. If you're a Game Pass Ultimate subscriber, you can stream your games from the cloud on your phone. And the rumored handheld in development as well. So, Microsoft is just trying to go everywhere the gamers are. And if you can't win those PlayStation gamers back, and the evidence is clear that you're not able to do that, well, why wouldn't you bring Halo to PlayStation? Because then, you can sell a healthy 7-figure number of copies that you would not otherwise sell to those PlayStation players who are not coming into your ecosystem. So I think this move to Unreal, which is obviously a very multi-platform friendly engine technology, it's strong evidence that Microsoft's going to continue down this multi-platform, putting their games on PlayStation path in a big, big way.
Mm-hmm. What you're saying makes a lot of sense. What I'm seeing, some people say in the comments on our news article is that some people seem to think Halo is just too important a franchise for Xbox to allow PlayStation to have on their platform. I would argue that Halo does not have the same cachet that it once did, and I don't think it has a very large, engaged community today compared to other popular shooter games. But you seem to think, Ryan, would you disagree? Halo is not too important today to get some sales on PlayStation.
Well, I think those commenters, the Halo community, and you are both right at the same time. I think it definitely is not a system seller, as it were, a killer app the way it used to be. Its best days are behind it. Now, are better days ahead for it? I hope so. But it's still extremely important to Microsoft. I mean, if we're being completely honest, the most important franchise for Microsoft out of now everything they own is probably the Elder Scrolls, just because of what, Skyrim's one of the best-selling games of all time. But then again, it'll have been so long since Skyrim by the time 6 comes out that will it be able to follow suit? I mean, maybe you make the argument that Fallout is the most important franchise they have, although even there, Fallout 4 was a good, let's see, well, actually 9 years ago. It was 2015, so that's actually been a while, and it's going to be a hell of a lot longer before we get a mainline Todd Howard-led Fallout game. But I still think that Halo's probably not the big gun in the arsenal anymore, but it is still extremely, extremely important. And so that's where I just would, and I'm not sitting here advocating for it. I mean, as a gamer, it's nice to have the big special thing on your platform, but there's just more and more evidence from Microsoft itself, their own words and actions these days, that suggest that they're just not going to play that game anymore. That they've basically ceded the loss, that because Sony's going to keep playing that game, and they've been able to continue to do that really successfully. And Nintendo, sure as heck, is going to continue to do their thing and have their exclusives and be super successful. But it just it seems like everything's heading multi-platform for Microsoft.
Well, Max, what do you think? From a PlayStation gamer's perspective, Halo 7 arrives on, say, PlayStation 6. Is it welcomed by the PlayStation community?
I think so. I'm kind of skeptical about how many people who are diehard PlayStation fans would jump at the chance to play Halo, but if it's a good game, it's a good game.
Right.
I think at this point, if you haven't gotten curious about Halo and checked it out on Xbox, it's been around long enough that you know what it is, and if it interests you enough, then you'd buy an Xbox, I would think, or play it on PC, I guess. No, I think the key thing here is multiplayer, because as we've seen, live service games live and die based on how many people are playing them. And Halo Infinite had kind of a rocky launch in the multiplayer department because of its, rollout of additional content, which probably would have been exacerbated by a massive player base if it had the entire proportionate PlayStation audience jumping on it as well. There would have been even more people playing. But even when you're short on content, having just a bigger pool of people to play with, I think can, give a game more life when it's a multiplayer experience. The other thing we're seeing, and we're seeing this left and right, the fact that Sony is throwing games on PC says a lot about this, where if you're going to spend millions of dollars to develop a game, it's kind of stupid to just put it one place. There's a sort of hubris that comes with exclusives, and we love to talk about the idea of killer apps and of, system selling apps, and that's a wonderful ideal, but it's again, games are so expensive to make that you really, it's bad enough that they that they are allowed to take, it's hard enough for them to take risks creatively, in terms of what's actually in the game. In terms of where you're going to put the game, you want to make it accessible to as many people as possible. And I know there's this sort of, we get this, we like to pick our teams. That's the whole premise of the show that we're making right now, is that people like to root for their own console of choice. But ultimately, video games are meant to be played, and the more people who can play them, the better. And that's fun for people playing. If you have cross-play on Halo and you've got your old buddy you used to play Halo 2 with, who switched over to PlayStation, and suddenly you can play Halo with him again, that's kind of a cool idea to think about. And then meanwhile, this, if that many more people can buy a new Halo game on an additional platform, that funds future Halo games, which is also good. Again, the exclusive talk is tricky. As for like Halo itself, I've dabbled, but it's never really grabbed me. And even when I was primarily playing on Xbox. It wasn't my jam. And I know that some people like that's their Star Wars. Like this is a whole universe that people adore. And again, it's the reputation has been tarnished in recent years. So hopefully that, whatever the new Halo Studios is doing can be a return to form. But, I think they're in a position, much like Star Wars, where like, how do you attract a new audience while also pleasing diehard fans, while also, making people who are somewhere in the middle equally happy. As for the Unreal move, the really key thing there is not so much, where you can put the game, is who can make the game. Because if Microsoft is staffing up, having to train people on slip space is time that could be spent making the game. And Unreal is a ubiquitous engine. A lot of people are, people use it left and right. There's a whole generation of kids who are cutting their teeth in game design in Fortnite, which, flows directly into Unreal Editor. And, the less you have to train people on how to use a tool set, the more time you get to spend actually making the game, which is huge. And yes, I mean, secondarily, it's also easier to port it to different platforms. I'm excited to see what they do with it. I think it'll be cool.
To your point, Max, and to something, Daemon, you brought up too. Daemon, you mentioned Halo 7, and Max, you mentioned, onboarding, coming into it as a PlayStation gamer. I think that Halo 7 probably won't be Halo 7. I think if they're going cross-platform, multi-platform here, I think we're going to see one of two things. Either a remake of Halo 1, Halo Combat Evolved, in order to just say, hey, come on, everybody, this is your chance to jump in from the beginning. You don't have to have 20 years of lore in your head to follow along. Or, and this is based on some tweets I've put out, I think people, at least the existing Xbox and Halo community, is a little more horrified at this idea, but I do think it's in play, and that is they might reboot it entirely. So I think it's going to go one of those two ways for the next mainline Halo game. I think we're going to see either a remake of Halo Combat Evolved or a reboot of the whole thing entirely. Now, I know that Halo's got this canon and everything ties together, but they broke that canon. They had their whole Silver timeline for the TV show that sadly failed. And they've got this bold new strategy of putting games on platforms wherever gamers are, and they need to welcome those people, and they need to get those people to be Halo fans, to be Halo customers. So I don't think a reboot is out of the question. A remake could definitely happen. Now, as to the question of, okay, if you want to follow this little train of thought and see where it leads, what about the pretty, I won't call it a cliffhanger ending. It wasn't a cliffhanger at the end of Halo Infinite, but it was very much a stay tuned next week for the next edition of Halo to see where the story goes. Well, Microsoft's already doing the same thing with Gears of War. Gears 5 actually ends on a cliffhanger, like a real legitimate cliffhanger. And guess what? The Coalition is either never going to resolve that, or it's going to be a minimum of 7 years, because the next mainline Gears game is, of course, Gears of War E-Day, a prequel going all the way back to the beginning with Marcus and Dom and Delta Squad. And that game is at least 2 years away because they didn't put a year on it in the showcase reveal trailer, which means it's not this year and it's not next year because they put 2025 labels on all the games that are expected in 25. So that's at least 2 years away, which means Gears of War 6, if they were to go back to it, is at least 7 years away. I actually personally think, and again, I'm not advocating for this, I just think this is what's going to happen. I don't think Gears is ever going to go back to that storyline. But I think if they're going to go with E-Day, they're also going to go with a PlayStation release as that same thing. Let's welcome PlayStation players in, going all the way back to the beginning here, and then move forward from that. But in terms of Halo, I just don't see them. Again, this all hinges on the idea that they are going to put it on PlayStation. If they are going to keep Halo as an Xbox exclusive, which there is absolutely an argument for why they should, because is at that point, if they go multi-platform with Halo, does anybody have any interest in picking up Xbox hardware at that point? And that gets into a whole Game Pass thing. We went very deep down the rabbit hole on this on Podcast Unlocked this week, but if the next mainline Halo is going to be on PlayStation, I think then the next big game is either going to be a remake of Halo 1 or a reboot.
Yeah, they don't put numbers in titles anymore. Like it's because it's, especially when it takes, when there's that big of a gap between installments, it just scares people off. I mean,
well, look at Final Fantasy. Like, the sales have been down by Square's own standards, and that may be in part because the numbers are just getting too damn big.
The amount of Final Fantasies is too damn high. I want to get your thoughts on this, Ryan. Now that the slip space engine is a thing of the past, I actually really liked the campaign in Halo Infinite, really enjoyed that.
Me too. I gave it a 9 for IGN.
IGN user Trey1990 says, flaws and all, the slip space engine made Infinite play and look the best Halo has ever been. Infinite should be the aesthetic standard for Halo moving forward. I'm afraid Unreal Engine 5 will give it that sterile veneer look that every Unreal Engine game has. Any thoughts on that?
It's a valid observation, a valid concern, because I do agree. Like, there are, in a lot of cases, not everyone, but there are a lot of cases where you can look at a game and go, oh yeah, that's an Unreal Engine game. Like, there is that kind of, it's like a sheen to it almost, for lack of a better term. And so that's where it falls to the Halo Studios team to have artists talented enough to give Halo its own unique look and not just look like a licensed Unreal Engine game. Although I would argue that as important as that or more is more the actual controls and the feel of playing Halo. Because Halo's always kind of had a little bit of a floaty jump, and just the way the physics of the game and the locomotion and the way Master Chief moves around and the way especially the vehicles are, I mean, the way the Warthog behaves. So that, I think the feel of it, the actual physical feel of how Halo controls in the game is as important or more than even necessarily how it looks.
Well, we are in uncharted territory when it comes to Xbox's properties and exclusives. We are going to be seeing their next big game, Indiana Jones, coming to PS5 next year. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens with Halo and Gears of War and all the other Microsoft properties going forward. Before we get to some numbers, I wanted to let you, dear viewers, know IGN has partnered with the Opera browser for the Opera GX IGN Edition, which brings all your favorite IGN content into your browser. It includes many features designed for gamers, such as RAM, CPU, and network limiters, a built-in free VPN, a built-in ad blocker, and more. You can download it now at opera.com/gx/IGN. So, we've got the results of last episode's poll. We were talking about horror games, and we asked which horror game do you most want to be remade, and the winner was Dino Crisis with 22.5%, and I agree with that. Let's get that going, Capcom. I would love a remake of Dino Crisis in the style of the Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4 remakes. Max, I know you're a Bloodborne fan. That came in second place, just under 20% there.
It's a good answer. Yeah.
Being a horror game, correct?
Yeah, I'm also a big proponent of Dino Crisis, which at this point I feel like that's probably a more realistic thing to hope for, because people have been clamoring for that even longer than people have been clamoring for Bloodborne to get a remake, a remaster.
Mr. Capcom, I know you're a big fan of this show. Let's get that happening. New poll for you to vote on for next episode. What Halo game would you most want ported to PlayStation first? Correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan. If we were only going to have 6 options, I think we'd want to include Halos 1, 2, 3, Infinite, and then Reach and ODST. If we only have 6 options, I don't think 4 and 5 need to be in there. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, why would you jump PlayStation players into the 2 probably most flawed Halo games in terms of, with 4, the multiplayer was not great relative to other Halo games. And with 5, it was the opposite. The multiplayer was awesome, but the campaign is easily it's the one stinker of a campaign in the entire franchise. So yeah, I mean, you'd either go with Reach or 1, I think. Combat Evolved or Reach would be the way to go there.
Well, viewers, let us know. Make sure to vote at IGN.com the day this episode goes live. And that's going to do it for this edition of Next Gen Console Watch. Thank you to both Ryan and Max. Thank you to everyone working behind the scenes here in our LA studio to make this episode possible. My name is Damon. We'll be back next week with more on the latest next gen gaming hardware news. We'll see you then.